Here we are.
Friday, June 21st. Good. Good. It's still morning my time. Eleanor, how are you today?
I am excellent.
Good. We've been kind of starting every one of these with just a bit of an update on what's going on in your ever changing, evolving world. So, what's new?
Well, I spent the better part of the last week because as you know, okay, thank you. Uh, as you know, the Noble Energy Map program is now live
Mhm.
and free reports are available. Um, it is not set up so people can save a lot of charts, but they can run charts. And I spent the last week writing the next report,
Mhm.
which will um, give people uh, quite a bit of information about their integrated chart. It will give them, uh, the next report will give them data on 5 of their integrated channels.
Right. Last week, I think you were suggesting. Did you call them primary channels or like they're sort of the heaviest
Priority channels.
priorities? Okay.
There are 41 possible channels that there are 148 channels in all permutations and combinations. And for this report, we are using the integrated channels in the integrated report, and I'm picking the top 5.
Cool.
And there are some charts will have up to 10 or 15. Uh, and so the first report will introduce the integrated channels and give those along with the 8 charts and just type for the 8 charts.
Mhm.
And then the next report will be everything.
Cool. I think my chart has 15 channels. So it's quite a few. Um, I was just saying to you before we started.
So I've finished writing that. I've completely proofed the channel book, which is at the publisher, and that should be out by the end of the month.
Excellent.
I just finalized the back cover, and I am going to be doing a 5-day free challenge on the 4 worlds, probably by the end of the month or beginning of July. And I will start teaching in July. And as I announced in my webinar yesterday, as I began thinking about teaching, and I taught college for 3 years,
Mhm.
and I stopped teaching college because I really didn't want to be academic. I didn't want to be intellectually talking at people and having them study and stay in the mental world. So in my classes, it will be much more spontaneous. The didactics will be pre recorded, and the material will be in small segments so people can digest it. But the crux of my teaching will be alive and responsive and engaging and in the moment.
Perfect. Um, I wanted to say that and encourage anyone listening to go and run the free report. Partly because I was saying to you earlier, the opening content, even just the background and just it was very succinct. It was very clear. And we've had a bunch of podcasts where we've kind of talked about aspects of it, but it was the first time that I've kind of just seen it laid out like that. And I think people might appreciate even just to read that and then get the report and then let it sink in a bit and see where it goes from there.
Also, the second report will lay it out even more thoroughly.
Do you have a name for the second report? Like, is it an advanced report? Is it how would people differentiate the two?
Well, this one is a free introductory,
Hmm.
and the next is the introduction to the integrated worlds.
Do you anticipate there being another chart at that point, or that's kind of the
It's
prime?
the chart, but I haven't. In the first report, we're just talking about the type.
Right.
But in the second report, the way the channels are described is different.
Okay. Well, that you just mentioned type, and that lends in very nicely to one of the things I thought you'd find
Okay.
to talk about today is generators and manifesting generators, and the notion, like Jovian very clearly still mostly seems to state there's four types, right? There's not a lot of recognition about the manifesting generator type.
I see that Cindy is logged into the chat and put a link to where to get the free report.
I see her comments, but I don't see the link. I wonder if
Um,
maybe it just doesn't show us in our chat thing here. So
well, the link is nobleenergymaps.com.
right, okay.
Okay.
Actually, this site even has a thing where I can flash something up on that. I'll look at that. But do tell, um, what like way back when um, you had discussions with Ra, and you were doing your own work, and you were there working with him to validate the system. Um, and you left, you broke partly. I'm assuming partly over just manifesting generator versus generator. Never
No,
mind.
I didn't break over that.
No.
Um, I broke with him because he really didn't want me in the human design community. And he didn't want me in the human design community because he wanted the research to be much more professionally oriented and knew that there was no way I could dumb it down to a fourth grade level, which is the level he thought people were at. And when we were teaching together and teaching um, basic human design, Ra, initially, when I studied with him in 1996, said there were four types. And then he began to realize that the manifesting generator, he called it a subtype of the generator. But really, I mean, when I did the research, it was very clear that it was its own independent type.
Mm-hmm.
And the big part of the research, from my perspective, was that I was able to validate the structure of the body graph from more than one variable. So the first thing I tested was the centers. Did the centers have a structure that would allow us to say that the root center, for example, was different than the sacral center, was different than the solar plexus, was different than the splenic center. And what I found, interestingly, and I don't know, how sophisticated the listeners are in terms of statistics, but what I used statistically was the statistical package for the social sciences, and that runs what's called a multivariate analysis of variant. You look at all the variables and you see how they can sort of cluster around some kind of statistic. And what I found when I did that, and I did the factor analyses, which look at, so I was looking at each center and I was looking to see, did they have something in common? And interestingly, the root center had four factors, and it's a square. The splenic center had three factors, and it's a triangle.
Mm-hmm.
It's not rocket science to figure out that there's something there.
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense, that, holds. And when I ran type on 30,000 cases, type held. And when I say it held because when I did the statistics to see if the frequencies of each type were separate from each other, they were independent of each other, I got very significant findings. So it said to me, no, we have 5 types, not 4, because I had 5 things were distinct from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went back to Ra and I said, Ra, there are 5 types, not 4, statistically. And he said, you teach 5 because you're the professional, but I'm going to keep teaching 4 because my ego won't let me teach 5.
Can I ask maybe I need to back the question up even further. Did the voice channel type, or was that an
No,
interpretation? Right? So it
no,
didn't come from
no,
the voice; it
no.
came from
Ra
Ra.
was not,
Yeah.
nothing inside the body graph was channeled.
Right.
After the voice gave Ra the structure, and Ra was with the voice for 7 days. 5 of those days were very specific, making sure that Ra got the proportions and dimensions of the body graph exact.
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me, it was maddening. He kept doing it over and over and over again. And the voice kept saying, no.
Right.
And
It was insistent, basically, like get it this way and only this way. And
the reason it had to be precise is that the body graph carries the sacred geometry of the tree of life. And when you look at the real body graph, not that abomination that's out there with all the curves and the roundness and I can't even look at that body graph.
it's so funny.
The body graph communicates on a nonverbal level something very significant.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was that Rod didn't want any part of it. He tried to get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And then some lady came up the hill with the body graph in her hand and gave it back to him.
Yeah, I had heard he had tried to destroy everything, right? Yeah.
Right. Then when he wrote the Black Book, Jürgen joined forces with him. The book was going to be published. Jürgen was part of the publishing company. They withdrew, and Jürgen published it with his family money and began traveling around with Ra and promoting it and teaching it in Europe. And they came up with type. And in the initial phase, it was simply a type to do or to wait. And then they defined it in a way that was understandable for people to learn. Much of what Ra came up with did not hold statistically from a content standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And, Ra never really talked to me about it. It was 2000. I think I started running the data in 1999, and for that whole year between 1999 and June of 2000, Ra was going through some pretty hard times. He wrote a book which he created profile for, and the publisher turned it down. He expected that it would be a big coffee table book and would financially give him some freedom. And around the time that the publication of that was turned down, his daughter was deported. She was in Sedona with him, living on a visitor's visa, and she was working. And when she went back to Canada, she had a credit card with her, and she wasn't supposed to, so she couldn't come back. So Ra knew, I think, that he was next because the business was going to be investigated. So he and Ambuja got married in April, and he left to go back to Ibiza in June.
Mm-hmm.
And when he left, I mean, he and I were in very good terms. I was planning to go to Ibiza to talk at the first human design meeting. And I pulled out of it because my daughter almost died.
Mm-hmm.
And I just couldn't leave. I mean, you know,
Yeah. Humans.
life intervenes.
Right.
But when I was doing the statistics between 1999 and 2000, I would get all of this output. And I would take it to Ra. I was, my office was on my second floor, and Ra would stay in the maid's room on the first floor. And I'd show it to him, and I'd say, Ra, where do I go next? It's not showing up here. Where do I go next? And so first it was, I tested centers, gates, channels, lines, tones, bases, colors. Every variable possible in the body graph, I tested. I did not find circuitry to hold. There were no factors in common. There was no correlations between gates. So circuitry didn't hold. Tones, colors, and bases, there was nothing there.
Mm.
It was no correlations, no consistency, no factors, nothing. Circuitry did not hold together the way Ross said it did, which doesn't mean it's not a good story.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that people don't buy into the story, but from a statistical standpoint, it's not going to show up.
Yeah. What would you like? I know lots of people that are heavily invested into their color, their tone, like spending time there. I've done that, and there are themes and things that resonate. Which, but like, what would you say to someone that's put in a lot of time? Like, how do you step back?
Ross said very clearly that tones, colors, and bases could not be used unless we had had the exact time within 10 seconds.
Mm.
Therefore, running tones, colors, and bases on anyone whose parent wasn't standing there with a stopwatch is not accurate. And from a conceptual standpoint, the concept didn't hold any validity.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a statistician, social scientist, either you're a scientist and you go with the data, or you make it up and you play.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have not worked with tone, colors, and bases, and they have no meaning to me.
Mm-hmm.
I did get the physical chart down to about 10 seconds using the lunar minute because I needed to differentiate my twin kittens.
Right.
So if somebody had their real birth data, maybe it would have meaning. But
Mm-hmm.
until we can do that and test it, we have no basis for saying that the interpretations are real.
I'm 20 years removed from being in a maternity ward. Is birth time being taken more seriously? Are there people?
Probably not.
Yeah, so there's no one standing there with a stopwatch doing that yet.
Well, when my kids were born, I did.
Hmm.
I had natural childbirth with both children, so I was fully awake. I had no drugs, and I watched the clock.
Hmm.
Um, and I recorded the time.
And my understanding of birth time is when the baby emerges from the mother, right? It's not the cutting of the umbilical cord. It's not the first breath. It's when they kind of sprout. Was that?
I would say it's when they take their first breath.
Oh, is it? Okay. Because I've heard otherwise, but I don't remember where I heard that.
Well, that's, we're in human design territory.
Yeah.
It's a good story,
Well, yeah, like did the
but
voice
what's the real
channel?
science here?
Yeah, did the voice channel? Do you know, like saying uh, that a person is born
No.
like this? That never came, right? So
No,
even
and also one of my students, um, who's an astrologer, told me the other day that she ran her charts using um, the cycles of the moon instead of an 88 lunar degree. And she got much more accurate data.
hmm,
So I'm going to investigate that. And if in fact it holds better statistically, I would put that into my new program.
hmm. Yeah, that was great. I mean, shouldn't we constantly be evolving and learning with this instead of having a rocky base to begin with and then
Well, there's certainly enough. Um, and I feel very confident in the science of the charts that I have, the 8
mhm.
and the integrated, because it holds psychologically, it holds physiologically, it holds gestationally, it holds astrologically. And when you have so many fields coming together and saying the same thing, it's consensual validity, which is a very strong way of then examining the data in each of the relative fields and further documenting them. Ra was fun to be around. He was a great storyteller, even when he was talking about himself as a scoundrel, which he did. Um,
Was he proud of that? Sort of. Was that like a
oh, he was very proud that he left his car at the airport and disappeared for 7 years, leaving a wife and 2 children, and they had him declared dead.
He was proud of that. Mm.
Yeah. Um, and he was, didn't hold back that before he left, he was a scam artist. I mean, he talked about it openly, certainly to Marvin and me. I
Hmm.
don't know what he told other people, but he spent many hours in our home, hanging out with us. Um, we were friends until we weren't.
I remember in a previous conversation, you had first met Raw, and then you didn't want anything to do with him, and Marvin kind of talked you into.
No, Marvin didn't talk me into it.
Oh, okay. I thought I was.
No, I met Ra in October of 1996 in Santa Fe, in Taos. And I was not the typical human design student. I was well dressed. I treated it like I was going to a professional seminar. So there I was in my suits and my dresses, and the other people were in t-shirts and jeans. And I took it very seriously and I studied very hard. And it was very clear to Ra and to Zeno and Chaitanya that money was not really an object for me. That I scheduled readings with Ra for a whole day. I had no problem staying in Taos an extra week to get certified. I came back to every workshop, and Ra had an eye for people who had money or people who could help the cause.
Right.
And because Marvin and I were sannyasin and had met in India at Osho's ashram, I had an immediate in, because Zeno and Chaitanya were sannyasin. Marianne Winiger, whose name was Patty Pata at the time, was a sannyasin. In fact, she held the machine gun for Osho, and her husband drove his Rolls Royce. Zeno worked in the kitchen. I'm not sure where Chaitanya worked. Chaitan researched jokes for Osho.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
So he was also in Oregon at the time. So the fact that I was a sannyasin gave me an immediate, she's okay. And during the initial workshop, I sat next to Tom Pfeiffer, and Tom and I became friends.
I know that name. Why do I know that name, Tom Pfeiffer?
He's in human design.
Is he? Oh, okay. Well,
I believe he is. When I broke with Ra, Tom broke with me. I never heard from him again. But early on, we were good friends. And October of 1997, I took the class, I believe it was on centers in Taos. And I met with Zeno and Ra. And at the time, I was doing transit work, and I had a gathering every Friday evening of people interested in human design. I was teaching it, I was working with it, I was studying it. And I said, you know, I would like to start doing classes. Zeno said, what are you charging? And I said, well, I'm charging my regular session rate. But it was more than Zeno could charge. Remember, I'm a PhD. I was in a private practice. I'm licensed as a psychologist in California. I had been in practice at the time for more than 20 years. And I charged a good fee. And Zeno could not compete with that because she had no qualification. So they told me I could not charge my fee and I shouldn't teach. And Ra was completely silent. He had given me authority to do a lot of things, but he didn't have the guts to stand up and support me. So as I left with him to drive him to the meeting we were going to, he said, just wait, be patient. So I was done. I went home and I was done. And I said to Tom, I'm done. You know, this man, this is not honorable. To tell me as a professional that what I've studied and paid for I can't use because somebody can't charge what I charge. I said, I can't do that. It's not ethical. It has no integrity. Tom, now, mind you, Zeno and Chaitanya had a monopoly on the materials. And Ra could not produce anything without them. So Tom bootlegged recordings for me, and he had them under his shirt. He was taking a huge risk. And after every webinar, after every workshop that he was going to, he would send me the audio tapes that he bootlegged. And I would listen to them, and he would come visit me, and we would talk about it. And then Ra showed up. He was going to spend a day with me, February of 1998. And Zeno didn't want him staying at our home and doing readings there because she was left out of it. So she booked the Lux Hotel off Sunset Boulevard in Brentwood. So it was expensive. And because they wouldn't give one of my best clients a $25 discount because they didn't like the way she signed up for the reading, I didn't send anybody to them.
Mhm.
And when I went to the initial introductory workshop, they had a room for 100 people. And there were maybe 5 people in the room.
Wow.
And it happened to be a week after my grandson was born, a 34-week preemie.
Hmm.
And my daughter almost died in childbirth. It was an emergency C-section, very traumatic. So a week after Noah was born was this workshop.
Mm-hmm.
And my arrangement with Ra was for everything I had done for him and was still doing, we were not paying for readings. In addition, children were always priced at half price. My daughter went to the hotel to have a reading. He charged a full fee.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really done.
Mm-hmm.
And he arrived at my home, and I think I told this story before. I had picked him up at the hotel, driven to In-N-Out Burger about 20 minutes away, because that's what he liked, brought him back to my home. No sooner did we get back to my home, Zeno called and said, "Oh, I double booked you. You have to come back to the hotel." Ra looked at me and said, "I guess I have to go back to the hotel." So I took him back to the hotel. A few days later, he did the reading for my grandson and charged Diane full fee. And I was just done. I don't get treated that way by people. It was so disrespectful of my time, of my schedule, of my professionalism. I was done.
Mm-hmm.
So then Tom went all out, sending me stuff. And I didn't have any communication with Ra until 1999, when Chetan called me and said, Ra is destitute. He had a premature baby, Loci, who was in the hospital, for a long time, almost died, and he's bankrupt. And in order to get back to Ibiza, he needs help. Would you help him? So Marvin and I discussed it. I said, I need time to talk to my husband. I went downstairs and talked to Marvin, and we both agreed that from a personal standpoint, Ra was not the kind of person with integrity we wanted to be around. But his message was an important message,
Mm-hmm.
and we needed to honor the message. And we needed to honor what we were being asked to provide for the messenger. And so we said yes. And what we said yes to was for him to arrive with his wife and 2 kids. At that visit, he arrived by himself. And at the end of a few days, asked Marvin and me if we would become his business partners on a professional level, separate from human design, and if we would form a legal contract with a legal entity as 50-50 business partners to service professionals. And he would continue doing human design for the general public because he had to dumb it down, but he wanted us to do the statistics and the clinical research. So we agreed to do it, and we got Tom to come back and record. We spent, I think, 2 to 3 weeks with Ra, 8 hours a day, recording what the voice told him.
So many questions. It's funny to hear the word bootleg on content that is meant to help humanity, right? Like who owns what's
Ra
channeled?
believed he owned it.
Yeah.
And he, to show his character, Eric Memmert designed the original Neutrinos for Windows program. And Eric is an upstanding human being. And I, for years, worked with Eric. I brought Eric to my home in 2000 because I needed his help with the program and with calculations. And for many, many years, I collected all of the payments for Eric and then put it through my bank and sent him the funds. I never kept anything. But Ra didn't like Eric having the program. So around the time I was working with Eric to do my calculations, because I knew there was another layer that Ra didn't have. Ra, behind Eric's back, authorized the Jovian archive program. And because I own the copyright on the body graph, he changed the dimensions of the body graph
Oh, that's interesting.
on the Jovian program.
On the sacred geometry, he changed it.
Yes.
That's not okay.
So that's who we were dealing with. I mean, I wouldn't change the proportions of the body graph.
They're important.
And he went behind Eric's back. The man who gave him the body graph to do charts. When I first studied design, we had no program. Only Zeno and Chaitanya had the program. I had to pay for a chart for the calculation, and then I had to hand draw all my charts.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw Ra go behind Eric's back, I don't do that to people. And I saw that Ra was basically not honoring his contract and not paying his bills and not doing anything he said he would do. So I attempted to teach human design, and it was very clear that Ra did not want me in the mix. So I left.
Mm-hmm.
And I continued doing my work with Eric to this day. And Eric very generously wrote me my own program, which I use to this day. And my son is now writing me a Mac version.
Yeah.
Which is so beautiful, it takes my breath away.
Yeah, well, and if it's honoring the actual calculations and stuff, that's good too, right?
And it's going to have, as in my free map program, it has the astrology with the planetary glyphs, with the hexagrams of the I Ching. And ultimately, it will also integrate the tree of life into the body graph, because the system is a synthesis.
Right. Speaking to, like, the root is a square and the spleen is a triangle. I have heard that the colors that have been used for the centers have no meaning. Is that I feel like I've asked that before, but I still don't remember the
They
answer.
were given to Ra by
Like
the
those
voice.
colors, basically. So there
I
must
believe
be
so.
meaning there. Okay. And then
I don't change, I am not changing the body graph.
mhm.
I am not changing the teaching. Uh, I am changing the disempowerment that the single human design body graph gives. For example, I saw two ladies the other day, both of whom were projectors, one of whom had 6 out of her 8 charts reflector, and who in the integrated became a very strong manifesting generator. She was very powerful. And when I said to her, people see you as very powerful, but they don't perceive your vulnerability, she burst into tears.
Hmm.
Uh, I've handled many cases through the years. I've been doing this for 25 years. I've dealt with many cases through the years of people who've been disempowered by being told they're a certain type, and they try to live within the confines of that type, and it is misinformation.
Hmm.
We are not one type any more than we can live, those of us who've done the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs or any other personality, a Rorschach test or a thematic apperception test. They're personality tests, for God's sake. They're not who you are.
Hmm.
You know, as a clinician, I don't label people. So please, human design people, you are not your type. You're a human being. You have feelings. They transcend your type.
Hmm.
You have consciousness. It transcends your type. So get unstuck.
Yeah. I mean, so strategy and authority wasn't channeled, right? That was, again,
Made up.
interpreted, helpful potentially, but made up.
Made
Yeah.
up. Yes. Now, some of the constructs are very useful.
Hmm.
And we can say the charts have been around for 20 years. Some of the things that Ross said do have validity. Um, for example, the 4521 is the only channel in the body graph that goes directly from the throat to the heart.
Mm.
You don't need Ra or any other human design person to look at the body graph and tell you that. So I tell most of my clients, if they have a 45 or a 12, that's the breath, and use your breath to monitor your emotional well-being.
Mm.
We
Yeah.
know that heart coherence is associated with health.
Hmm.
So we know in the body graph, the 4521 is the heart oxygen. It's, and Ra's interpretation of it being related to money, being related to, resources, being related to someone who wants to be in charge and take power. All of those are interpretations. And you have to look at the person you're with before you interpret something that could derail their life.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you a question about that 45-21 then. Wendy has the 45. I don't
You
remember. I'd have to
and
look.
you have the 21.
We both have the 21 in Chiron. I think she has it in Chiron.
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't know enough about Chiron to understand where, like, is does Chiron appear in the mental world, or is it independent of that? And then what kind of theme for my wife, for example, because breathwork is turning out to be something that's like, the more you say it, the more it's evident. But that 21 coming from a Chiron theme or energy, which I don't understand enough about, but she forms that.
Chiron is an asteroid, and it is a healing energy. It functions a lot like Sagittarius in the ninth house astrologically. The ninth house astrologically has to do with superconsciousness, with values, spirituality, religion, um, higher principles. And it's expansive. And Chiron, what I see it as, because I've also studied Magi astrology, and the Magi astrology people think that Chiron is the key to the gifts a person has. And they make a big um, deal of what aspects your Chiron astrologically.
Mhm.
So when I'm looking at Chiron, I look at whether it changes. When I'm reading a chart, I'm not reading one chart. I'm looking at what turns on and off. For example, a lot of times the nodes are all in the same four planetary positions, but
Mhm.
sometimes in one of the worlds they change, they shift. What does that tell us? Where is it in the body graph? Where is it in the worlds? And what might it mean for the person when you piece together the worlds? So I don't have a formula, Sean. I look at the chart
Mhm.
and I look at what's turning on and off, and I'm looking at whether the Chiron makes sense in terms of the person's energy. And usually it shows me are, where their consciousness has meaning. So your Chiron and Wendy's, if it's also in the 21, would say to me, look for where they try to take care of people. Look for where they try to open someone's heart, like you're doing every Friday with me,
Mhm.
right? You're not wanting to be in control in the 45, but you're wanting to give people resources and energy that opens their heart.
Mhm.
And that's how I look at a chart. Who is the person sitting in front of me? How does this make sense for them in their life?
Mhm.
And what do I know about the gates, the channels, the worlds, the energy that will resonate with that human being and empower them?
You clearly have a ton of background experience and intuitive capabilities, but when you look at someone's chart and sort of, I've heard the term keynoting, right? You're kind of looking for, where do you start? Do you start at the root, or is it each person? It's just something pulls you in, and that's like, what's your process for that?
Well, I have a chart of priorities, and doing the reports has forced me to document some of what I do. But early on, and I was saying to somebody yesterday, I have a case book that I wrote probably in 2001 to teach people how to look at the multidimensional perspective. I have to find it because I worked really hard on it, and I had written and I had done the audio and written little pieces to people, and I think there were over 100 cases, and my son and I coded them all and took identifying data off all of the charts. So the casebook had all of the charts, all of the audio, all of the written for study. I just have to find it. But now I was forced to go through and do a listing of what priority channels I look for first.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if someone has the 34, 57, 10, 20, that's a big priority channel.
So I have both of those.
And that's the one I would read for you first.
And is that because,
You march to your own drum.
yeah.
You're highly intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
You take action when you feel the energy pushing because it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody can tell you it's not when you know it is.
Uh-huh.
So that's, if somebody has that in their integrated chart, that's a priority. And then I would look to see, where do you have it? Which world is it? Now, it would be very different. You can't get it spiritually with the 34. You can get it emotionally with the 34. So then that becomes a sensitivity to you. That if somebody needs you emotionally, you feel pulled.
Yeah.
Often to the detriment of yourself.
Uh-huh.
Now, that's something I can say to somebody clinically because I know it clinically, but I don't know that I would see that in the human design material with the 34. Taming Power of the Great. Is it for you? Is it for someone else?
That's a
It
good
depends
question.
on what your configuration looks like.
Mm-hmm.
If you had the 34, 10, for example, that would be very different than having the 57, 34, 10. Would be very different than having the 57, 34, 10, 20. And if you had the 54, 10, 20, it would be very different than if you had the 34, 20 and no 10.
Mm-hmm. What?
I'm sort of navigating this wonderful baby who wants attention.
Um,
Right?
so I still got to dig deeper on this sort of idea of priority channels. So is it because those are channels that are louder, or is it
No.
because they come from the sacral, which is being a manifesting generator, and that's
If somebody has the 34
mm-hmm.
coming out of the sacral center, depending where it goes, it's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to push them.
Mm-hmm.
What strategy they use to deal with it is dependent on where it is, how it is, and what it is in their body graph.
Mm-hmm.
So, I read the energy in the body graph. And that's what I teach people to do. I don't teach them to memorize.
Mm-hmm.
It's worthless.
I'm incapable of it. I'm finding so, and I'm quite happy to hear you say that. Yeah, no, it's.
People need to begin to look at the mental chart, the mental world chart, and see what else was defining the person at birth. Where were they spirit? Remember, a baby doesn't enter the mental world. They have no cortex that can register mental world linearity.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't come in until they're 3 months old. So, what are we reading? Really, they're functioning as emotional, physical, spiritual beings. And the cortex doesn't operate till they're 3 months old, depending, some babies are earlier, some babies are later. But really, as a psychologist, we know at 3 months of age, if a baby is not reaching for an object, that baby has a mental deficit.
Mm.
And it's a marker. It's a critical, each of the critical times that I delineated with my calculations, to my surprise, are bona fide critical periods in human development that are markers that delineate the mental health of an infant as it develops. Or, for example, with the 7-day spiritual marker, it's when cultures have noted there a shift in the spiritual anchoring of the soul inside the baby.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Ryan, don't be jealous, but I've been shy.
Sorry, my phone just went. Got it. Sorry.
so the I'm getting rid of cat hair, lest my mouse not work. So I read what's in the 8 charts, and I look at the integrated. And, as I said with myself, I said to Ra, I'm not a manifester. I wait and I wait and I wait. And I also had said to my husband at one point, there's only one thing in my life I would die for: love. They're both in my chart on the spiritual level.
Mm.
So when I saw my 8 chart, I went, holy shit, this explains it. It explained me, it explained my son, it explained my daughter, it explained all the babies I knew and what I was seeing and who they are. Whereas the simple human design chart, I felt you're all over me. Worth every hair.
That's right. I've been asked a few times like what your design is. People ask me about your design. Would you, and maybe not today or today, but would you be willing to sort of keynote your design and what you've learned about you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my students asked me about it yesterday, and I just sent her my design.
Yeah. Do you want to pull it up and talk through and talk about what you'd call your priority channels and? I don't want to put you on the spot, so
No, I don't. The version of my chart that I have available has all of the charts and all of the composites, and I wouldn't want to share that because it would be so overwhelming for everyone. I usually only, in the initial phase, share the 8 basic with the integrated. So when we talk next week, I can certainly go over my chart if you want me to.
Well, I've got an idea for you. You could go to nobleenergymaps.com and generate your free report.
No, I couldn't. I could not read it from there.
No? Okay. So I was just doing a little plug. But I think I'm sure a lot of people would like to hear that because you've talked many times, in the mental world, you'd be a man.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Right. I think that next week would be better when I can have it in the right format to show. And maybe I can figure out, maybe, Sean, if you'd be willing to do it on Zoom next week, so I can actually share and point, whereas on Restream, I don't have access to the sharing in the same way.
Yeah, it's definitely tough to make this whole production work easier, but let's keep talking about that. I'd like to make that
Okay.
for you. I do
Yeah,
want to.
if we do it, but we'll figure it out. But
Yeah,
yeah, I'd much
me too.
rather
Okay.
do it when I can navigate in my chart and show what I'm looking at.
Okay. Well, let's set a date this
And
week.
the other thing, since it's my chart, I can actually share with your listeners my own experience of those gates and channels and how they operate.
Mhm.
So, for example, my take on the 5818, which is in every single one of my designs, is very different than Ra's interpretation, which is cringeworthy, in my view.
Let's talk about Ra's interpretation. I think it was Chetan that had said that his Ravi Ching was basically written. He was cold. It was just crumpled up paper and charcoal writing, and and it definitely, when I read his interpretation and you just see words like bigot and things like that, it's just so harsh, right? It's this harsh.
I've never read it.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
It means nothing to me. This is in detriment and this is exalted. It has no meaning astrologically
Hmm.
in the way we use it astrologically. So mixing the metaphors and working with the I Ching in a way the I Ching is not worked with doesn't mean any. I go to the I Ching text
Hmm.
for the I Ching. I've never gone to Ra's I Ching because it's a secondary source.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting.
And
So
I
you.
learned my astrology from the real astrologers, not the computer astrologers
Hmm.
who are learning canned language. They're not interpreting the energy of the planet with the energy of the sign, and also understanding dwads and super dwads that give you the undercurrent meaning of each sign and degree. So remember, the human design system is a synthesis.
Hmm.
Ra had no knowledge of astrology, of the tree of life, or of the I Ching. He was basically uneducated and unsophisticated, and he had no psychological background.
Hmm.
So you have to take his interpretation as the interpretation of someone who was learning as he was going.
You just described me, so which is cool. Or
You're
I'm fine.
much more open-minded than Ra was.
Mm. I like to think so.
Remember, Ra was, and he didn't know this, he was an emotional ego manifester. He did not know he had a solar plexus defined
Mm.
because he never looked at his multidimensional designs.
Yeah, and I think I asked you that before. The multidimensional concepts and work, were you were already exploring those and presented it to him, and
I didn't present him all of it. I didn't have all of it. I had some of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I did do the statistics on what I was calling the triple design matrix. And it was the dream design, the sleep design, and the body graph. And type held across all the matrices. So I knew they were valid.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew the structure was accurate from the critical periods in human development.
But when you type added up, manifesting generator was a type at that point, right? It wasn't the 4 types, right? Okay. Mm-hmm.
And the last communication I had with Ra, interesting, was 2002. And it was an email, and I had sent him Loki's dream and sleep design. And I said to him in my email, you know, Ra, when you take into account the spiritual component of a person, you see different things than you would if you only look at the mental world, the waking chart. And I said, I think this is something that needs to be considered. Now, he had already said in the book we were working with, the workshop we did on the triple design matrix, where I documented it as a type, that we could not actually get a full interpretation of the body map and the different matrices. You could not get a full picture of the way things worked without looking at the additional matrices, which operated on a different energy, and that you needed to integrate the matrices. So at the point I sent him Loki's dream design and sleep design, I was beginning to get the calculations, and he was very angry at me for doing that. And he admitted to me that he could see things in Loki's chart he couldn't otherwise see.
Mm.
And then I never sent him all the charts, and he never saw the calculations.
Mm.
I did not share that with him because at that point, it was my work and it was no longer human design.
Mm-hmm. Earlier, it popped back into my head, so I'm just going to say it. I saw a video of Ra. I think he was in Sweden or Switzerland. It was very early on. He was writing on he's using a projector. It seemed very, very early in when he was trying to describe this. And at the time, someone had said, with your system, and he flat out said, "It's not my system," and he said it like 3, 4 times. It seems clear that later he changed his tune on that.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a point where you saw that, sensed that? I don't even remember the timing of that thing, so that may have been before or after he met you. I'm not sure.
When I met Ra, he was in business with Chaitanya and Zeno, and they had formed New Sunwear America. Eric Memmert had New Sunwear for neutrinos. Ra began to have difficulty with Zeno and Chaitanya. They were pretty tight-assed. It was all formulaic. And they had worked out to do or to wait, and then the language of interpreting every gate and every channel had to be the exact words. It was formula.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very slow producing materials. Extremely, very beautiful materials, but very controlling. And when I was rescuing Ra in 1999 from them, he no longer wanted to be in business with them.
Mm.
Loki was born, in, I want to say April. I'd have to look it up. But he was, Loci was, I think, the 33rd week, if that much. And he really, his life was hanging by a thread. And he was in Albuquerque Hospital, and it basically bankrupted everybody because he was in the hospital for 3 months in the NICU.
Mm.
And Ra had no money. And Zeno and Chaitanya didn't have money. They were always broke. And Ra had a lot of fallings out with them. So when he came to visit in 1999, he was on the outs with Zeno and Chaitanya and had broken with them.
Mm.
And he made a legal contract with Marvin and me. And the next thing I knew, he was back working with them. And he wanted, the first sign I had of Trouble in Paradise was that he wanted to sell our professional package through Zeno and Chaitanya and take a royalty when they sold it and not split it with me. And we had a 50-50 partnership on anything Rave Life Sciences produced.
Mm.
So I said to Ra, you can't double dip, Ra. Either you share it, as our contract says, or you don't market it through them.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't be teaching medical professional stuff through Zeno and Chaitanya and teaching it through Rave Life Sciences at the same time. So he began to hedge his bets. And then when I said that, he started Jovian. And then he wanted Jovian to be for the general public. So it was really a destitute man looking for a way to leave a legacy for his family.
Mm-hmm.
And he had the human design system that was given to him. And he was not a good businessman in terms of protecting his rights to it. Nothing was copyrighted when I came on the scene. Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I own all the copyrights, including for Eric's neutrino program, because Eric hadn't copyrighted it.
Mm.
Now, Eric and I are friends, and I would never do anything to hurt Eric. We wouldn't have human design without him.
Mm-hmm. The business of human design is such a fascinating thing right now to observe.
I know nothing about it.
Yeah, well, and mine's
because
more.
I have not been in the business of human design.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in the business of being a psychologist
Mm-hmm.
and a coach, and a hypnotherapist. I was president of the Hypnosis Society. I'm an ASH consultant. I have all my professional qualifications. So
Mm-hmm.
human design is a hobby. It's not a business.
No, but you came to it with some business savvy. Like you had the foresight to recognize the importance of some of these things, right?
Well, I'm a scientist. I'm a
Mhm.
social scientist. I was given the task of being a social scientist.
Yeah.
Not a clinician. The human design would not have held for me as a clinician because it's too disempowering if you're only using the mental world.
Huh? Let the cat
Excuse
again.
me.
Um, yeah, I guess my question on the business of human design, you were talking earlier about charging for reports, and I see lots of people today who, they've invested time in the system. They want to be of service. But it seems like most people seem to struggle with charging for it because it is such an important thing for everyone to potentially benefit from if they can hear it. So it's just a very curious thing to witness and observe, and I'm even in there a bit too, right? My background is being a computer consultant and a drummer, but it seems like I'm in this world and would like to add value and be of service. And I feel weird. I really sit down every time I think about like charging a buck to share some of the things I've learned. There's an inner struggle.
Well, it's a question of how you share it.
Mm-hmm.
When I read a chart, I'm bringing 50 years of clinical experience to it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just reading a chart. I don't know the qualifications of the people who are reading charts.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were a consumer, I would vet my people before I believed what they told me. Because it's a dangerous thing to tell somebody that they're a reflector or a projector and therefore I've cleaned up clinical damage from
Mm-hmm.
people who have been told they're a projector and need to wait to be invited. It's bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
They need to recognize themselves and they need to know where to put themselves. But we're not here in this world to sit back and wait for an invitation or wait for the energy around us to move us to manifest.
Mm-hmm.
We're in this world as a divine being to live our purpose and our mission that's given to us by God and nobody else.
Mm-hmm.
No matter whether you're religious or not religious, there's an I am inside of each of us.
Mm-hmm.
And that I am knows who we are. And nobody ever has a right to tell us we're not that person.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now I want to ask about the G center, because it seems like the G center is kind of the I am, right?
Yes.
Some are open, I'm defined. How, like, so when
statistically, an open center, a defined center did not show up to have any medical or psychological meaning whatsoever. So, if somebody has a defined heart center or an open heart center, they're no more likely to have a heart attack
Mm-hmm.
than the other kind. And same thing, you can't diagnose thyroid disease from an open or a defined throat center. You can't diagnose the self. Now, I've delineated, and in Santa Fe on Wednesday, the 18th, I will give a lecture on the self center and the gates of the self center and the paths of intelligence in the tree of life. Let's synthesize what is that self center and the gates we have active telling us based on the tree of life.
Mm-hmm.
But based on your self center, what do you know?
That's a good question. It's interesting because I know in the mental world, I've got this Sphinx marker energy, whatever you want to describe it. My friend Nathan pointed out, and I don't know if this stands up, but he basically said the G center and the way I'm defined, and with that sphinx, you can literally place a sphinx over top of the G center, right? It's the two paws facing forward and the tail going out the back. And that was a really helpful visual for me for some reason. Like it really kind of told me I'm here for, it seems that I'm here for my own self direction. And then
Everybody's there for their own self-direction.
Sure. Is it true to say that it's particularly important for me to follow that so that others? I'm going to incarnation cross stuff, which I know you have a different take on, but like my incarnation cross, as I read it, was very short. It was basically, I'm here to be intuitive about the past and bring forth effectively shortcuts for others to benefit from. That's kind of how I've read it.
I don't know where you would get that.
Yeah. It's not
That's
exactly
somebody's interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
And I would rather you come up with your own interpretation of what the Sphinx means for you.
Mm.
So when I have what I've designed for what I call patterns of orientation, the
Mhm.
keywords for the hexagram and its cross, the question I would say to you is, and Sphinx, what do you know about Sphinx?
Too many varied things to even say what I think I know about Sphinx.
So then that would be that you take it into meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And you ask yourself, what do I know about who I am and my wisdom and of where I want, in alignment with my higher purpose, to be of service?
Yeah, it's a big question. I'll have to sit with that one.
Those clean questions are the kinds of questions that I've written for every path of intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was doing my calendars, I would pose those questions in the incarnation crosses. Because self-reflection about your own body design and integrated chart is far more productive than having anybody tell you about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've given myself some homework mentally here. I've got the Book of Changes, and I've never actually read the hexagrams from that source. And I think it's time to go back to basics with that. So
Always go to source.
Mm-hmm.
Don't go to interpretations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, that said, I am publishing a book on all the channels.
Mm-hmm.
And
So-
when I wrote it, I did refer to the I Ching as my source material,
Mm-hmm.
along with my astrology books, along with esoteric theory. So it integrates many things, including clinical data on what I know about different frequencies.
Mm-hmm. I might be misremembering this, but so circuitry didn't stand up. Did channels stand up because the gates would have come from the hexagrams?
No.
So channels was kind of another construct that came after.
None of Ra's content statistically connected with it within itself.
Mm-hmm.
That said, there are constructs within the body graph that make sense, and that there are things that have over time gained credibility. But I would not bet my life on the interpretation of any channel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. Yeah, definitely not. How are you doing for time? We've got a couple of questions here.
Okay, I can answer questions.
One may not be enough detail in the question, and it was asked about an hour ago, but I'll pull it up here in case you want to take a stab at it. But I think you may be missing some context. I flash it up on the screen there. So it says, "Hello, Dr. Eleanor. I have 1156, 762 defined across." Oh, she does say all four worlds. So, do they work differently in the other worlds?
Yes, the 1762 is a portal to the spiritual world. The 62 is in the spiritual world. When somebody has a 1762, they're likely somewhat telepathic. And if you also have the 1156 in all four worlds, I'd say you are definitely a channel. You know things that you haven't been told. And the 1156 is usually likes a story. So piecing things together with a beginning, middle, and end, or in some kind of logical sequence for you is important. The 1762, depending what other connections happen from the throat, would make a difference. So where those connect with other frequencies in the body map are going to determine the meaning of how you use them and how they function.
Mm.
Mundane Mystic, does that answer your question?
Yeah, as I said, that question was about an hour ago. So,
But looks like there's
oh no,
it's
yeah,
250.
they were back. You know what? I also said she, and I don't know that for sure. So, there actually is a follow up question to that. So maybe,
Yeah, does being born a preemie make a difference, correct?
yeah. Does being born premature change any of the calculations?
No.
Okay.
We base the calculations on the moment of birth, and that's what astrology does, and that's what Ra did. So, do we know if it makes a difference or not? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
I think because the birth time is when the baby takes the first breath, or when the umbilical cord is cut, ideally one and the same. So we use the astrological custom. And developmentally, preemies catch up. So, you know, my grandson was a preemie, and it threw me off as a developmental psychologist. But within a short period of time, the development was on target with all the critical periods.
Mm-hmm. So, right, the voice didn't say anything about this, and so I keep wanting to circle back to this, but like, there's basically what the voice said, and then there's what Ra said. Is kind of, one way to look at how some of this information exists right now. When you sat down with Ra for 3 days and he told you everything the voice said.
No, we sat down with Ra for more than 2 weeks.
Oh, 2 weeks. So
Every day.
what was that
8
experience?
hours a day, at least.
Did he lecture to you? Did you ask questions? Like, what was that like?
Both.
Both?
We were sitting at a dining room table. Ra sat at the head. Marvin sat next to him. I sat next to Marvin. Tom was on the other side recording. And Tom was completely silent. He was there to record. He was not there to participate. Ra pretty much lectured. We asked many questions. And there were times when Ra would share something, and I would say, Ra, I think that we're going to need to further expand this using X, Y, and Z. So the idea of us sitting with him was to be, Marvin was to do the clinical medical work, and I was to do the clinical psychological and social scientific. And so I asked many questions and raised many hypotheses about what would need to happen to the material in order to validate it. And ultimately, Ra had no interest in validating it.
Hmm.
I still have all the data. It's all preserved. I have all the printouts, and I have all the statistics.
Is that something that might be shared at some
I'm
point?
happy to share it. There
Yeah.
are some factor analyses in there that I have not figured out. So there are things within the structure that are still to be discovered.
Hmm.
And it's beyond my statistical capacity to figure out what needs to be run in order to take it to the next level of statistical analysis.
Well, I know you're working with my new pal now, and you've got her working with some crystal, like doing some crystal research for you and experimentation.
Yeah.
If you were to ask this network or universe for people that could look at some of the things that you don't know what to do with, what kind of skills or people are you looking for? Because they may reach out to you.
They'd have to know the statistical package for the social sciences. They'd have to understand multivariate analyses of variance. They need to understand a path analysis that looks for causality and relationships. So they'd have to be pretty. I understand what all the statistics are, and I ran my own z-tests and, looked for. I did the statistics in the statistical package for social sciences to get the significant findings I got. And I did all the graphing and all of that. But I used a statistician to consult with to make sure I was on the target. In terms of taking it to a multi-factor there needs to be a whole other much more sophisticated level of analysis. So it would have to be a real statistician.
Okay, so that's
Not even a social scientist, a real statistician.
right. So that's the skills they need, and half the things you said, I don't even know what those are. So I'm not the person for that. But what would they discover potentially? Like what gems do you sense are in there that they would discover if they had those skills and came to you? Like what questions remain?
Well, there may be a circuitry
Mhm.
that could be found. There were factors that showed up. And what a factor means is, for example, if you wanted to differentiate between cats and dogs, you'd look at the genetics, right? And you'd find certain components that all cats had in common and components that all dogs had in common. And then what differentiated them would be some kind of factor.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're doing IQ tests, for example, they're broken down into subparts: information, vocabulary, object identification, all kinds of skills. And those cluster around certain factors.
Mm-hmm.
So the way they're broken down is language skills have certain factors in common that kinesthetic cues don't have.
Mm.
Verbal, kinesthetic, auditory, all have different things in common where you can say, this is a visual skill, this is an auditory skill. We can't do that with the information Ra gave us.
Mhm.
The circuitry was a good story, and it works in a lot of cases,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not real. So, as human design people, use what makes sense, throw out what doesn't make sense.
Right.
But whatever you do, check it with your clients, because if it doesn't resonate, they shouldn't be using it.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever have interactions with Richard Rudd? And the reason I ask is there was a circuitry book that Richard Rudd did for the Human Design System, and I don't remember what year that was done. And then he broke from Ra as well and went into gene keys and had his own contemplations on.
I met Richard at the, oh, it just started to rain. I met Richard at the first workshop that Ra and I did in Taos, and I believe it was the dream one.
Mm.
And we had a few interactions early on, and then he really wasn't interested in what I was doing, and I've never studied gene keys.
Mm-hmm.
One of the people who studied gene keys did a reading on me, and it didn't resonate at all.
Mm. I guess the reason I ask is that he wrote what appears to be the official circuitry book, but then he broke. So I'm curious.
Well, I don't know if he still thinks the circuitry works or not, but
Mm-hmm.
if he wrote the circuitry book when he was with Ra, I can tell you that statistically it has no validity.
Mm.
Whether or not people want to keep using circuitry because it's a good story is another story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, I have found, for example, that the 4730, I don't talk about circuitry because it's meaningless to me. But I do think that the 3740 is related to digestion. And it certainly does pan out clinically when I ask people with the 4730 if they have any digestive issues. They generally say yes. So we have to be scientists here. This Ra said, don't take my word for it.
Mm-hmm.
So don't take his word for it. A lot of what he said wasn't true.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't, he was dishonestly honest.
Just honestly honest?
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, when he was dishonest, he knew he was being dishonest. And he knew to be honest about his dishonesty.
Mm.
I mean, he told people, this is an experiment. Check it out for yourself. Don't take my word for it.
Right.
He said, I'm a storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
He was not presenting himself as other than he was, including the fact that he said a lot of things that weren't true.
Mm-hmm.
But he warned people that they weren't true.
Well, there's a question for you there. Like his legacy, prophet-like status. If Ra didn't say it, it didn't happen. Kind of. That's kind of the vibe that's out there. That's what I pick up on. What would Ra like? Ra's not here. That happened with him absent. So and from my sense, and I get a lot of flack from people since I met you, which I'm I'm good with, but it's almost like I've had people disconnect from me because they seem to think I don't like Ra or I don't appreciate or I'm not grateful, and that's not what the case
I'm
is.
extremely grateful to Ra.
Yeah.
He gave us a great gift. And I and Marvin took extremely good care of Ra.
Mm-hmm.
And when Ra was going back to Europe, he showed up at my home unannounced with Loci, who had no visa. And I literally drove Ra to the passport office downtown LA and went in with him and helped him get his visa for Loci.
Mm-hmm.
And I played Mario Brothers with Loci. We went to Toys R Us together.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we were friends. And I am very grateful that Ra trusted me to do the science, and that without the system that I validated, I would not have validated that we live in four worlds, and that the field of psychology, by ignoring that we live in four worlds, has done humanity a great disservice. The spiritual world, the world where the I am is the world we need to foster and recognize and relate to in our children. And we need to stop the nonsense with emotionality and mental world brainwashing of our children. They are spiritual beings who have a soul,
Mm-hmm.
and we're denying the soul.
Mm-hmm.
And that's tragic. And I am grateful that I have the documentation of the four worlds in critical developmental times in a baby's life. It can change the field of astrology, it can change the field of psychology, and it can change the field of medicine. And that is my mission, is to teach the four worlds. The rest of the human design people can take my work and teach it. That is a gift from Ra, unbeknownst to him. Beth is saying she has Chiron.
Yeah, I'll flash that up here.
Um,
I have Chiron activated in all four worlds, both conscious and unconscious in gate 57, part of channel 3457, gate 34 in Pluto. Does it mean that I have to cultivate my I think she's trying to say intuition.
if you have Pluto in gate 34, then that's a pretty strong push toward your intuition. And what world is gate 34, Pluto? It's all worlds, I take it.
I'm assuming she means gate 34 is her Chiron?
She
Based on
says Pluto in gate 34.
right. Okay.
And gate 57 is what sign?
We'll see if she chimes in here.
So, Beth, I can't answer without the other details. So feel free to email me at ehp@noblesciences.com, and I will look and answer your question for you.
Cool. Thing about time, there's one other question here.
I can take one more question and then I need to go.
Yeah, and I've kind of asked it before, but I know a lot of people may not have picked up on it before. But it is this, this, and it's again a raw kind of thing. Global cycles, this 2027 shift. But this question is specifically, I already know how you feel about that. But specifically, this seems to be with four worlds. Do you want to take a crack at answering that question?
Well, we know that Pluto just entered Aquarius. We know that we're at a critical time in humanity's evolution. You just look at the politics of the world, and we could be wiped out any day with a nuclear war. with the jokers running the world.
Mhm.
So what Ross said about 2027, I don't think is what's going to happen. I do believe we're in a battle between good and evil. I believe that God is in control,
Mhm.
and I have faith that we're going to come through it with consciousness. I believe that finding the four worlds is an opportunity for those people who've lived in the mental world and been miserable, to recognize that they've been sold a lie and to come back to themselves and take charge.
Mhm.
Beth said Chiron's in Libra in 57. So, Beth, that makes it especially important for you to use your 57, which is part of your life mission as a healer, and to use the 37 because it's Pluto, which means that it's fiery, and you need to be really careful that you use your intuition gently isn't the word. It's making sure that what the way you say what you see and perceive and know psychically does not undermine the power of the great in the person you're dealing with. You can come on really strong with the authority of your intuition, but the other person may not be ready to hear what you have to tell them. So depending on how you receive information, and I need to look at your whole design to really lay it out for you, but the 3457 with a Pluto energy up against the Chiron energy says defer to the Chiron as a healer, not as a guide. And you have to leave the person with a very gentle push.
Mhm.
And the 34 could push hard.
Well, hopefully Beth found that useful. I did as well because I have a lot of this going on, and everything you said there was checking in for me. Quick question about 57. And I don't know if this is correct, but it's been my experience or what I've picked up. 57 is very acoustic. You said psychic. I feel 57 is really tied to the right ear, like noticeably aware. Is have I misinterpreted that? Is there some truth to that? It's
Hold
been
on a second.
sure.
I'm almost done. Marvin just came in to tell me he's been listening this whole time.
Is he gonna come and say hello, or is he?
You want to come say hello? Is my hair okay?
Well, Marvin keeps threatening to get a mohawk, so I'm just waiting to see if he shows up one day and he's got. He hasn't done it yet. How you
So
doing?
you two together are so wonderful.
Hmm.
And you bring out, you ask her questions like you just did, and then that calls out. No, 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 no. No. So no, I never threatened to do that. But you asked the last
Who's talking to you?
Yeah, it's not me.
here.
Sounds like you're getting a call on your phone or something there.
It was
Okay.
here. So you ask her questions like near the end, just recently, and then it calls out the your high level spiritual humanity in the way you speak to this lady, and it's just so beautiful.
Thank you.
You guys are great together. I love it.
Wow, thanks,
It'll be
Marty.
done soon.
It's a
I was
highlight of my
working,
week
but
as
then I
well.
couldn't help myself.
For those who are on the call who don't know, at 3:30ish, another podcast with me is coming on YouTube. And if Cindy's still here, maybe, or Sean, if you have the link, maybe you could give it to them if any of them want to listen. That was done a while ago, and it was talking about my cosmic guidance for mastering your life book.
Yeah, I'm just looking. I've got the email here. I think there's the link. There must be a way to. I know there's a way to.
And Monday, Mystic, thank you for your comment. It means a lot to me.
Definitely. I will.
Cindy just put it in.
Oh, did she? Oh, perfect. Okay.
So, Sean, how about if we end with a little attunement, like I do in my webinars?
Perfect. Can you explain what an attunement is? Because I have my own interpretation, but like to me, it's clean language. It's kind of meditative. But like, what does attunement mean, really?
Well, I use the word, it's really a self-hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And as I've said before, you know, I was actually trained by Erica Fromm Reichman at University of Chicago in hypnosis. And she was one of the biggies. And then I was the president of the Southern California Society for Clinical Hypnosis, which was only for professionals, and I'm an ASH consultant. So when I was in the four worlds, the language that touches the soul is language that has all four worlds. It's an integrative, the spiritual is the unifying integrative field of consciousness. And so when I was president of the Hypnosis Society doing presentations every month, I was teaching them clean language, which was developed by David Grove.
Mm-hmm.
And Kai Davies Lynn, who lives in England, was his wife and helped develop it. So I studied with Kai, among other people, and it became very clear to me that the language of the soul, if we're going to tap into it, must actually be clean language.
Mm-hmm.
So before and after my webinars, I weave self-reflective inner reflection to my listeners in the hope that they'll take that in as self-hypnosis and follow the suggestions that I always give to empower them.
Yeah, thank you for that. And because I've been to probably a dozen webinars by now, it's always very grounding. Then there's a group conversation, and then you end with an attunement. And there's been a few times where I can tell you've snuck something in there for me. Like I'll be sitting there kind of quietly just listening, and I could just feel a little smirk come on my face because I'm like, that felt like that was for me. So someone else that's taking this in, do you suggest like they put their feet flat on the floor, close their eyes?
I mean, generally when I'm sitting, not at my desk, but if I'm sitting listening to a YouTube, I'm probably on my couch with my feet up.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to sit up straight and put my feet on the floor.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to take my animal off my lap.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm going to pull one dog to me.
Yeah, you've said
Have
to meditate.
some fur in my hand.
Yeah.
So, I'm much more relaxed than that. Don't make it a thing.
Okay.
It's fluid, it's soul, It's here to empower you. It's not here to give you a direction where you have to put yourself in a certain place in a certain way. So can we do it?
Sure. Yeah. I think what you're saying is it's not homework, but it's your intention and take it in. I got it.
And maybe, and I never know what I'm going to say. So whatever I say is what comes. So find a comfortable place where you can be internal and undisturbed. In a comfortable position, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth, making the inhalation ever so shorter than the exhalation. With each inhalation, allow the energy to come from above through your crown. And as you inhale, feel that consciousness of that breath spreading throughout your whole body. And as you exhale through the mouth, allow that exhale to release any energy that does not belong to you. And send that energy out into the universe and back to its source. Freeing your field to be yours and yours alone. And from that inner place, feel the central column of your body. Feel the energy coming up the center of your body, otherwise known as the satsuma, your spine. The energy coming up your spine and going down your spine makes a double helix. It is the life force energy flowing through you. And for those of you in human design, the channel 515 is in all species, in all worlds. So when you bring the energy up and down your spinal column, you're integrating all four worlds. The mental world, where you mostly reside in your ajna, in your crown. But as you breathe the frequency of your mental energy through your body. It comes down through your body and its circuitry, whatever that circuitry is, and it informs you of your physical state, your emotional state, your mental state, and yes, your spiritual state. And your spirit wants to be whole. Your spirit knows it's whole. Your spirit knows it knows everything you need to know. And if you don't know, all you need to do is sit quietly as you are now and ask. You can say, God, what is so important that I would be in this place? Show me the way, guide me. Or you can say, higher self, I need an answer. I am asking a question. Please show me, give me, tell me the answer in any way that is right for me to receive it. You can use your intelligence, your creative intelligence, which comes by an interaction between the spirit body and your mind. After all, you decide what you pay attention to and what you listen to and what you hear. So from this place of inner spiritual grounding, empowerment, set your intention to know what you know when you know it, and to stand firm with it, regardless of what anyone outside of you says. Be open, listen, take it in, meditate on it before you make a decision, and take your time. Time is your guide and your friend. Spirit often needs time to process, to feel, to check it out with the mental world and the emotional world and the physical world. Sometimes you need time. Take all the time you need to know what you know. Stay in the place of knowing as you begin to feel the boundaries of your body, and extend your aura 7 feet in every direction, impervious to anything you choose to not allow into your aura. And from this place here, send love to yourself and smile, inner smile, and send that smile to every ounce of your being, the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And let that smile radiate out 7 feet. And from that place there, feel your body boundaries, wiggle your fingers and toes, come back into your body, opening your eyes and sending love to everyone listening, to everyone in your family, your friends, your community, your country and state, the globe, the world, even to the extraterrestrials among us. Let's pray for peace and love.
Nice. Yeah, we should do that every time.
Thank you.
Awesome. Have a great weekend.
You too.
We'll see you again next week.
Okay, take care.
Take care.